Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Change Management in the ECC, Guiding Teams Through Technology and AI Adoption, sponsored by Aurelian. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping notes to go over. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available online. You have joined in listen-only mode. This helps avoid background noise throughout the webinar. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to ask your questions at any time throughout the webinar. The team will answer them at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please use the question box in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. With that, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Max Keenan is the co-founder and CEO of Aurelian, which helps 911 centers reduce non-emergency call volume so dispatchers can stay focused on real emergencies. Now I'm going to turn it over to Max to introduce the rest of our speakers.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the kind introduction and appreciate APCO for hosting this webinar. I'm joined today with three people who, I don't know if this is overstepping, I'd call my friends at this point. We've worked very hand in hand over the last few years. We've got Carl Hatton, who's the director of PINCOM 911, and we've got and I'll actually let them introduce themselves too, but we have Catherine Roundtree, who's the supervisor in Hamilton County 911, who worked very closely end to end throughout the presentation. And we've got Corey Lynch, who's ops manager and really ran end to end the Aurelian implementation. Honestly, when we're thinking about this webinar, we're thinking kind of why we wanted to gather people today. One of the biggest things about technology is actually not just the technology, but how you actually implement it. And these are three people who played three different roles in end-to-end implementations of AI. And we're on really the cutting edge of this technology. So it's really exciting to have them here today with us. I'll let them kind of quickly give a more in-depth introduction of themselves. Bueller, Carl, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I didn't want to just jump over anyone. Yeah. So hello, my name's Carl Hatton, a longtime APCO NENA member in Washington State. I run a medium-sized PSAP in the far northwest of the state. We have been running live with this particular AI solution since April of this year. And so we are getting close to a year of running it. And so, yeah, happy to join you. I've been in the 911 industry since 1986, so I have a couple of years of experience, and happy to talk about how we move this technology into our center, and then how we've handled a lot of change management. Frankly, lots of technology happening, lots of changes for everybody. It's just, and it's moving at a faster and faster pace.
Catherine?
I'm Catherine Roundtree, and I'm with Hamilton County 911 Communications. I've been here since 2004. We went live with Aurelian in January of this year. So we've had our technology department be a part of implementing, like helping with workflows and everything that goes along with it.
And last but not least, Corey.
Hello, Corey Lynch, La Crosse County, Wisconsin, Operations Supervisor, Public Safety Communications. We're on Wisconsin's west coast. We went live with Aurelian in May, just crossed the 41,000 calls handled by Aurelian this morning. The process we used for the change management in this is one that we've extended to other changes because the only constant in the communication center has been change lately.
A lot of that's kind of exactly why we're here. I always think that, everyone talks about why telecommunicators hate change, and I think I took this for granted when we first started working with PSAPs. I know many of you know my story, but really wound up into 911 coincidentally. We were automating calls for hair salons of all places, booking balayages plus blowouts plus whatever you could possibly imagine. And one of the hair salons we were working at was a relatively large hair salon in a big city. And they had a school pickup line that was blocking their parking spots, and they called the non-emergency line at 2 p.m. on the first day of school. No one answered. And that's what really sparked us to getting into this, was understanding kind of the problem at hand. And one of the recurring things everyone talked about was how difficult it was to get dispatchers and call takers to actually accept change. And one of the things that we realized with this was a few things. Like one, it's kind of justified. You imagine like you're taking this life or death calls back to back to back to back. If anything messes up your groove, it often messes up your cadence, messes up the response, and those things can compound. And so when we started thinking about this, when we went through our first implementations, we noticed that some agencies we worked with, these included, were just phenomenal at this process. And we noticed that as people are implementing more and more technology, this is actually becoming much, much more important. And really when we say this, like, we talked about innovation in the PSAP. My biggest thought process here is like, it really starts more than anything with the people. The line I always say is, no one cares about, like, you shouldn't care about how the solution works. You should care about the problem that it's working to solve. And I think AI is a very trendy term that gets a lot of excitement out of people, sometimes fear. And really what we should be focusing on is, why are we doing what we are doing? And that's one of the things that I think when we think about framing any technology, it's important to start with. And this actually relays really heavily into the change management piece, right? When it often comes down to letting your team know what is happening, making sure that they're in the loop, and making sure that they know exactly how this is going to progress. I think, and not to call on people, but I think Catherine's team did this really, really well and did this really, really early. Catherine, could you talk a little bit about that process of how you guys involve supervisors, telecommunicators, line level people early on?
Yeah, so we started with our technology committee, and we brought them in, and then we got supervisors involved with CTOs, and we have telecommunicator advances and seniors. So we got all them, and they went through Max's training, and then they started working the dashboard in the training environment, and that seemed to really help with them, their buy-in.
Yeah, did you feel in the beginning?
I'm sorry.
Did you feel in the beginning people were like afraid of the idea? Like, what was their initial reaction before you kind of got them hands-on?
They were not happy about it because they, like you said, they do not like change. So they were kind of unsure, the unknown. But as soon as they got to see the dashboard and how it works and how it takes the calls, they were on board with it.
Yeah, and Corey, was it similar for you guys? How exactly did you start getting the whole team involved?
Pretty similar. We started at the top, did kind of a top-down approach. I brought the administrator at the time on board. We rolled it out to the supervisors, went through the demos, then rolled it out to the line staff, just kind of bringing up the idea, really selling it, but also managing expectations. It was building some of that excitement and then eventually everybody was on board.
Yeah, I remember when I was out in La Crosse, which probably was August of last year, you actually had me do a demo for the call takers at the time that were on shift.
Yeah, and that really helped sell the product. Just being able to manage that change is tough in itself. You build excitement by managing expectations and getting the buy-in that you need from the staff that are going to be using it every day.
And how did you kind of open? I was consider like, how'd you open those lines of communication so people could felt comfortable to ask questions and actually understand what's happening?
I think that was fairly simple. I don't have much of a poker face, and when I started talking about this product, the excitement was very much there. And in general, the curiosity, I think, helped to bring everybody along in really selling the product. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, one of the things that we think a lot about is like, how do you actually introduce this the right way? And this is something you talked a little bit about, but like understanding that why is really important. And it doesn't have to just be like, I know we're talking a lot about Aurelian, it doesn't have to be Aurelian, it's with any technology. If you're making a change, communicating that why is the first step into getting people's buy-in. Change for the sake of change is just frustrating. I hate it when things change and it's not obvious that it's actually for the better. It's not obvious for the why. And making sure that why is obvious or as early as possible and as frequently as possible, and reminding people of that why is really important. And like really, talked about this a bit, but starting truly with the problem that you are solving. Like for us, that problem is really obvious, right? It's 65 for the average PSAP, 65% of the calls that are coming into the admin line, and they're non-emergency calls. And for us, like, this is actually why we started working in this space entirely. It's like a mind-blowing fact that, the analogy I always use, is that you train your telecommunicators as Navy SEALs. And by having them spend 65% of their time on admin calls, you're using them as mall cops. It's the greatest misallocation of labor I could possibly imagine. Like, these 911 telecommunicators are literally trained to handle anything. It could be plane crash, a school shooting, God forbid, but literally 65% of their time is being spent on something entirely else. Carl, I felt like you were really good at communicating this why to the staff early on. Like, I felt like day one when we started going and talking to your team and broadening out, there was a really clear reason that they knew why we were there talking to them. How'd you kind of do that pre-work?
So, we kind of had a perfect storm. Like a lot of centers across the country, our staffing, we were at almost half staffing. So from a PSAP that's supposed to have 20 full-time dispatchers, we had 11. As the director of a small PSAP, I was working radio and console, which I haven't done for a number of years, so that was challenging. But so we had this need to do something, and hiring people was really problematic, as it has been for years. And so we did a couple of things. We social engineered our business phone lines with the kind of the old-fashioned phone tree, right? But we re-social engineered it so that dispatch wasn't the first option. It became one of the later options, and we actually dropped our business line phone calls by about 20% just by doing that. So our staff, when they saw this solution, saw an opportunity, especially when we're looking at the data, that we might be able to reduce that, again, the remaining calls that are coming into us by about 60 to 70%. And so they were pretty excited about that. I beta tested one of the first Aurelian push outs that occurred in Washington State. I helped beta test that. And I was really impressed with how of course, it doesn't sound exactly human, but it interacts more like a person does. And it's certainly way easier to navigate and more fun to navigate than press 1 for this and press 3 for this kind of thing. And so I was enthusiastic, talked to my staff and shared with them, the kind of the results of my beta testing, and then the results that we could see, and sharing the data and statistics with my staff on what our social engineering had changed. They were all aboard. They saw this as a positive thing, and I didn't really have any pushback, just concerns about how it was going to work, what's the role of our dispatchers when it rolls out, how do we manage those calls. But yeah, it was a pretty positive and easy experience for us, and most of that was because of a lot of preloading and experience. And I think it's really important to share data. I share data on the statistics that we get on our performance dashboard from Aurelian with my staff on every couple of weeks. I'm giving them data, like here's how many calls it's handled and all that. And I think that's really helpful.
I like that piece of like actually sharing the data with them. One of the things that you said that I want to double down on is actually sharing them the data of why you thought this was a problem. What exactly were you showing them to kind of get that buy-in?
So, as far as the number of business calls, we could see that back a number of years ago, before we re-social engineered, even did that minor change, we're doing between 2 and 3 times the volume in business calls than we were in 911. And when I asked my staff, across the industry, we are all aware of the super high critical, high stress calls that we get and why that's really hard on us. But I've done some research, but some research with a university on the stress that the non-emergency, day-to-day, really pretty ridiculous calls that we get, and truly they are, that are completely non-emergency, and how that actually creates a higher stress load than even the high critical calls, because those just don't happen as often. So my staff understands that, and so then sharing them the data and the lived experience, they're sitting in there and suddenly they're getting 20% less business calls and dealing with 20% less silliness, and able to focus on their 911s and focus on their radio traffic. This next step to get rid of 65% more as an average was like, they were all for it. Like that's what we get paid to do, is to handle the high critical, important emergency things. That's why we're here, and we don't want to handle my neighbor's fence is a foot over my property line, and I'm really pissed off and don't know how to talk to him. That's, we got rid of most of those. So
yeah, and then you mentioned that 60-70% was kind of like your estimate. Where did that come from?
So we looked at the history from another 911 center that had implemented the 6 months or so before we implemented, and that was kind of what they were seeing, was that kind of reduction. And so, and I looked at it as, even if it was 40%, if it's 40% plus my original 20% that we got just by social engineering, that's a win. And even if I could get rid of, 10,000 calls a year, that's enormous for my staff and the amount of time on task that we're spending, and how that distracts from 911s and from handling radio traffic. It was worth it. So we just decided to do it and see what happened. And we're sitting right now at about 65% of the calls Aurelian is handling for us. It's handled, since we started, about 16,000 calls that we didn't have to take in the moment, right? Yeah.
That makes sense. And then one piece, and I want to say we did this with you, I can't remember. Did we do a health assessment to kind of frame what that actual percent would be of the calls that you're getting on the non-emergency line?
Yeah, thank you. And before we jumped, like, I was excited. I had beta tested it. I was impressed with it. We actually sent 1,000 calls at random over to Max, and they ran it through their processor and then gave us a report back. I think it was less than a week, frankly, back then. We got a report back that said, here, without changing any of the assumptions that Aurelian sort of comes with, we could have handled about 60% of your calls without changing any assumptions. And then we start looking at the assumptions and the logic trees that we're kind of using. We were able to, and we still do that. We're still finessing that and kind of pulling out a little percentage here and a percentage there. So that pre-test was a really great way to look at it and say, yeah, if we use this, this is what our experience is probably going to look like.
So something Carl hit on that I want to double down on. Like, I love that when you guys realized that you had this non-emergency problem, you started with the simplest solution, which is, hey, we think we have a lot of people that are calling the wrong place. Let's add a call tree. What I find is, like, a lot of people have the non-emergency problem, and like making the jump directly to automation is a great start, but it's like a lot of times there might even be lower hanging fruit and something that you can do easier and cheaper and still have 20% reduction. Like, if you don't have a call tree in your non-emergency line, like, that should be your winter project.
Right.
Even those small things, huge outcomes to your telecommunicators.
I agree completely, and it's better customer service, frankly. Even just changing the call tree, people were more likely to get to the resource they were actually looking for. And what we struggled with is we dispatch for 17 agencies in our county, and the Clallam County, the Sheriff's Department, was the only agency that had a direct dial, public-facing phone number that rang to us without any phone tree, without any interference. We just answered their phone for them. And it took me over a year to get the sheriff convinced that some sort of phone tree was necessary, and I actually was just going to implement it on our side regardless of what they wanted, because we were done answering all their business calls. And that by itself just decreased the number of, they're not nuisance calls, although I'd frame them that way just because of what our core function is. They were calls that really had nothing to do with this. How do I get hold of a prosecutor? Can I leave money in the jail for a prisoner? Like, all kinds of stuff that have nothing to do with our core mission, which is 911 and emergencies.
And then we talked about a lot with change management within the PSAP. I think it's also important to talk about it with the your user agencies, because I always like to think of it as, like, the PSAP has two customers, right? The first one's obviously the caller, and the second one is your respective agencies that you dispatch for. So how did you kind of get the buy-in from those user agencies?
I'll let you talk for a bit, but I can answer it, but go ahead.
Carl, fire away.
Okay, so for us, the change to not answering business calls direct dial from the Sheriff's Department was a struggle with just that agency, but all of the other agencies looked at that as like, well, of course, you're giving them preferential treatment. We're all paying the same kind of fair, rates. So that was a fairly easy political move. And then going to an AI solution was a little harder. We talked to them, and from my perspective, I sold it as it's actually providing better customer service. That's the way I look at it. I said, the AI can handle hundreds and hundreds of calls all at the same time. It's not going to get a busy signal. They're not going to get a dispatcher that's worked their 15th 12-hour shift in a row that's just done. They're not going to get that attitude or a potential attitude. My staff is amazing. but every once in a while you're tired of taking that same call for the 100th time. Aurelian Ava never puts a call on hold. Doesn't ever mishear something because there's radio traffic or all the things that happen, right? So that was my upsell up the food chain to both our city council and then to my user agencies, that this actually provides better service for those reasons. And they didn't argue with me. They're like, okay, well, we'll try it and see what happens. And that has been our overall experience. So
that makes sense. We've a lot about what I'd call like maybe like the informational phase, right? Where you're like, maybe this is usually done before you even buy any software, right? It's how you let the staff know that like this is what you want to do and this is why you want to do it. The next step, which I actually think is maybe even harder, is when you go in and you're actually implementing this change and making sure that this happens smoothly. One of the things that was a big realization for us early on is, at this point we maybe implemented 15 customers live. When we implemented 15 customers live, we started hearing a lot of the same things from every customer about like, why are we doing it this way? Or why are we thinking about it this way? One of the things that I realized is that this is the first time that any PSAP has ever implemented AI non-emergency call taking. It's the very first time. And so it's very important for like us as the vendor of being that like trusted advisor and helping people walk through these what I would consider best practices. I would say for 99% of our customers, they've never implemented an AI solution before. And the last thing that they implemented was a CAD or a call handling solution. And these are very fundamentally different projects with very fundamentally different timelines. And I think that those can kind of skew expectations of what this is actually going to be like. So when we think about like scheduling and setting up any implementation for any new software, I always like to think of it, especially if it's AI, as a run, walk, crawl approach. So really the first step, right? You've informed the team, you've made the decision, you've kicked off the implementation. For us, it's like, really, it kind of gets into the gritty of actually setting out the plan of how we're going to take this, to reality. And when we do an implementation, we're targeting pretty quick timelines. Like we're usually targeting that 6 to 8 week period. And so it's doing a lot of things very quickly. It's a lot of change very quickly. And I always like to do it in like very much a phased approach. Catherine, can you talk a little bit about what that I guess maybe walk phase was for us?
Absolutely. So we started out with only a few workflows. So we did not turn it on for all of the non-emergency lines. We did certain call types. And then we're still, to this day, we meet bi-weekly and we will go through our feedback and see if we can still build workflows. But we started out small and then we just keep gradually adding to it where it takes more and more of our call load off.
Yeah, and that like original crawl phase, I remember I think we had 6 a.m. Eastern test runs because we wanted to target the lowest call volume possible. I remember you waking up every morning. Can you talk me through like what exactly those looked like?
Yeah, so that's obviously our slowest time is early in the morning. So we started out and we only turned it on for select agencies that were not quite as busy. And we tried to like see how it would work. And then we turned it on for a few more of the agencies and then a few more, and we just kept adding to it.
And we were testing for like 2 hours every morning for probably 2 or 3 weeks, right? Really from December all the way leading up to Christmas.
We were, and then we would change the time to a little bit busier time and kind of do the same testing, but yes.
Yeah, and then I remember like the first like really like big day for us was New Year's, one of like the busiest days of the year.
Yes.
I remember like there was a specific thing that I really loved was like the reason we ended up turning it on for New Year's was because people started asking for it. Can you talk about like, you start with a system that's maybe like it's kind of configured for niche cases, and we've added more and more configuration, and then we kind of hit this hump, right, where you kind of start hitting. I would say you've hit the majority of cases. How did you think about at that point making the decision to add more and more routes, more and more people, longer test runs, and then all the way leading up to the eventual go live?
So once you see like what it does, and it's basically taken the work of about 3 telecommunicators right now for our non-emergency side. So being short-staffed, that was pretty much a no-brainer of adding the workflows. And the more that we see it work, and the better it's getting, and our telecommunicators are getting excited. So you talked about New Year's, firework call is one of our biggest ones there. So they're like, oh, we don't have to take any more firework calls. And so then we added, that portion of it to it.
That makes sense. And then the other piece you talked about, can you dive in a little bit deeper of like, well, and this is why I think it's very different from a CAD, is that we went live in January and we're still meeting every other week.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand just why we meet every other week.
Yeah, we went live in January and still we meet every other week and we review things and make configuration changes and add new things. How has that process been?
So there's so much to it, and there's so many different workflows that we want to get the most out of the system that we can. So when we meet, we basically go through the current workflows, and when someone's working the dashboard, they give feedback. So if something doesn't go like it should, or if they see that it could work better, then they leave feedback, and we meet with Aurelian and we go through that feedback to see what we can add to it or what we can change.
Yep, and I think like the kind of contrast that I want to point out here is like when you going with the CAD, and Corey can talk about this a little bit. Usually there's kind of like a start cutover, right? Where at some point you're live and the vendor says, okay, you got it, good luck. In many ways with this, like we view this as like a managed service. Like there's going to be a lot of changes, whether it be a change because there's a Thanksgiving Day parade that's shutting down Main Street, or whether it be a change because you get hit with a snowstorm in Chattanooga randomly and there's 11 inches of snow on the beach in Pensacola and you're getting smoked by it too. Or in Carl's case with the do not drink order, where 3,000 gallons of diesel spilled into your water supply, and just like that, no one in the city of Port Angeles can drink water. With any of these systems, I like to think of it almost as like a trainee, where you have to constantly give it new information and make changes to it so that it's up to date with your SOPs and your best practices that you're using to handle these calls with your actual telecommunicators. And so because of that, like there's this constant process of making changes, making iterations. And the question that I always think about is like, as a team, are you the ones that want to make those changes? Or do you want to have a vendor that's going to kind of help you make those changes? Corey, I know when we first started with you all, there was kind of 1 or 2 people that didn't really see why this platform happened. How did you kind of see like the phased release approach, this kind of iteration approach, starting to win some of those people over?
Yeah, it took some time to win them over, but the phased approach, they're the ones that leave the most feedback that Catherine was talking about, going into those calls for service, reading their feedback, making those adjustments, and then meeting with those dispatchers and saying, this is what we changed, or getting clarification on their feedback has really brought them more on board. I don't have any dissenters right now, knock on wood, hopefully that continues, but the whole managed approach process and what you just said about treating it as a trainee, I think that's a really good analogy for the system.
Yeah, I think like, what's maybe a little bit different than some products is that like day one, when you're first testing, it's not going to be perfect. And really, when we think about this, run, walk, crawl, a lot of it is like, how do we make that experience as smooth as possible? Something Carl hit on that I love is how important the non-emergency line is. Like a lot of these calls feel like nuisance calls. They can feel really frustrating to a call taker. But one of these things that I think about is it is the #1 way people interact with law enforcement. The #1 way. It's the vast majority of the calls that are coming into the PSAP. And really, you have to make sure that these people are having the best experience possible. Even if you're doing it, even if you're testing, even if you're in this pilot phase, as you're kind of doing this phased release, you still have to make sure that these callers are having the best experience. So we're getting some questions from the chat. One of the ones that I really like is, how do you bring seasoned veterans on board when their existing workflow, when they feel like their existing workflow feels fine, when they feel like they know exactly what they're doing and they know how to do it, and then now you're bringing on this new platform that's changing the way that they operate.
I can chime in on part of that. My seasoned folks were the first ones to buy in. It was my younger dispatchers that were a little more hesitant on accepting the change. And I don't know why that is. I haven't put a finger on it, but the seasoned people, like, yes, this is taking away those parking complaints, or how do I pay a citation, the ones that they've dealt with for years and years and years that really don't belong in the dispatch center at all, never should have come here, but just by being 24/7, we ended up being that answering piece. And I think it was a relief to my more senior folks.
I guess I'll say from my perspective that a similar experience. A lot of my senior people have been working here for a lot of years and remember the day when we didn't take all those ridiculous calls 24 hours a day constantly. And so it was nice to let some of that go. And I think it's important in your agency, anytime you're dealing with change management, is find those unofficial leaders in your agency, the people that other people listen to, and you try to get them on board first and get them part of the design process, get them involved. That's how we did it. I took one of my supervisors that is pretty vocal, that people really listen to for good and for not so good, and got her involved in the setup and call handling and all of the logic behind this. And then she started seeing the benefit, and it sold itself then. I didn't have to work nearly as hard because her experience was positive, and then we could share that with the rest of the staff. And I think the other part, and Max, you sort of touched on this, is that the ability of my dispatchers to pull up a call and then do the input part of it and put their feedback in that call immediately. This is what I think went wrong, or this is what I think went right on every single call that they handle. They can put input in there and then see week to week that input being heard and changes being made in the background that actually address some of those questions is really big, because there is no other platform, not our CAD, not our phone, not anything that we have that allows our dispatchers that kind of touch, nor responds quickly to issues that are real, right? So we have a CAD issue and it will be 18 months to 2 years before the CAD vendor decides they're going to make a change. And I will tell you from my personal experience, I'm on the phone with one of the technicians at Aurelian and suggest something, and before we're even off the phone call, it's already been changed. Like I don't have that experience with any vendor. And so that's also part of the sell, though, with my staff, is they recognize that if they're bumping into something or something doesn't quite make sense, all they have to do is ask a question or point it out. And then within a week or two, it's resolved and they see the difference, right? That's huge.
And I think, Carl, you hit on this a little bit earlier, actually communicating those changes back. How did you kind of have that feedback loop with them?
So, part of the challenge, and I'll admit, part of the challenge in rolling this out, and we were a pretty early adopter, was managing expectations. My dispatchers had a little different idea, and even I did, of what Ava was actually capable of doing. And then when it would behave in a way that we weren't expecting, we were all like, well, that doesn't even make sense. Why would it not do that? And so in the rollout, my only suggestion, that I've made it before, is offering some insights into the logic that it's using and how the different components of it either intersect or don't intersect, which is why things maybe don't translate across some of the barriers. But yeah, I talk to my dispatchers, like I said, about every couple of weeks. I'll give them the data. I'll show them the statistics that we're up over 16,000 calls now. I can go through and look at the feedback, and we touch back on some of the feedback and have discussions with the dispatcher. Hey, your feedback was great, but you recognize that Aurelian can't actually do this thing that you think it should be able to do. So, thanks, and we'll make sure that Max knows about that, because magic happens in the future. Or we can say, yeah, we've seen this little change in the logic that is impacting us. We went and talked to them, and they've either reversed that or re-engineered it a little bit, and now that issue that you brought to my attention is no longer an issue. And that's pretty big deal, because in our day-to-day, our dispatchers don't get that kind of responsiveness from our vendors, frankly.
And then we just got a question that comes in, perfectly timed. was what training formats work best. I'm very opinionated about this. We've done one virtual training and it was a complete and utter failure. I don't think people can learn things over Zoom. I mean, I personally can't. I've never learned anything over, anything meaningful over a webinar or over a Zoom meeting. And so for us, like that training format that we found works best every single time is going out on site. I think and you guys can probably chime in a little bit better than I can. I don't think the platform is really complicated for a telecommunicator to use. I actually think really the reason why we go on site and do the training is to answer their questions and kind of explain some of these things that we've already talked about. It's really about getting people excited about the whole reason why we exist more than anything. And kind of between the three of you, we've kind of had slightly different training cadences. Like Catherine, I think we did like small groups, right? Where we had like anywhere between 10 and 20 that showed up. Carl, we did a lot smaller groups where it was probably between 1 and 5 most, and kind of the same for Corey. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how that training approach went and maybe even like things you think we could do better? Catherine, you're unmuted. I'm going to let you lead it off.
Okay, I was waiting to see if anybody else talked first. So we did the classroom portion of it, and I think once we went to the floor, and I know Max, y'all were on site for that, and we went live for the 2 hours at a time, and we used different telecommunicators every time to work the dashboard and be able to answer questions and kind of get the ins and outs of how it works. I think that really helped with getting the training and getting people involved early.
From our perspective, our rollout was really fast. I mean, fairly fast. We did, 4-hour tests for maybe a week, and then we went to 8-hour, and then went to 24, and we were just live. So we did a lot of pre-work though to try to get the logic to work for us and our call types and all that kind of stuff. I think involving more people in helping to develop the call types list and some of the like required questions versus not required questions, get some buy-in. The hands-on training, having someone come out and actually sit in dispatch. Most of it, like you said, Max, is just having conversations with people and kind of allaying some of their, well, what if it does this, or what if it hallucinates, and I mean all the things, right? And that, I think that was really helpful. And like your slide shows the champions on the floor, super helpful. And then our experience too was just a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. We had someone come back out and sit with dispatch for half of one shift, half of the next shift, just to check in and say, hey, how's this going for you? What do you have suggestions? And that touchback also is pretty rare in kind of our world of vendors and other people that we deal with, and just speaks to that desire to keep developing the product and making it work, and then helping. I think for us, the hardest part of our rollout was just managing expectations. I think a lot of our people kind of had this thought that this thing was going to be this miracle cure and just basically handle everything because it's so smart and can do it. I will admit that there's a lot of magic there, frankly, but some of the expectations were a little outside of the capabilities, and describing that in detail so people actually understand this feedback is helpful, this feedback is completely outside of scope and not helpful, right? And so I think that was probably one of the biggest, not really a stumbling block, but certainly a training opportunity for my staff, is kind of helping them. Because once they understood or have a better understanding of what it's capable of doing, that refines their feedback and it refines the product for us.
Yeah, I like that point of, hey, like making sure to set the appropriate expectations. A piece of that I notice is that when a lot of people think of AI, they think of this AI that's going to answer any question that they want, right? Like they call in and ask what the hours for the local Taco Bell is, and they want to get the hours and the number. And in many ways, like it's actually very intentional that we don't want to do those things, where we don't want to be Googling things, we don't want to be going on to outdated websites and giving outdated answers. Like really what we want to make sure is that the information we're providing is always accurate. That's really our number one priority. And so there's a lot of like design decisions that go into that, and making sure that your team knows what's going to be the reality of the product versus like the whimsical understanding of what AI might be. It can be very different. And so actually making sure to be very clear about that, I find to be really important. The other piece and then Corey, maybe you can touch on this a little bit, but just bringing night shift into the fold. How did you guys kind of make sure that they were getting the same level of training as day shift?
Well, my night shifters got the first training round, and they came out of it happy. It was short. They seemed to all be pretty confident coming out of training that they were going to be able to run the system. And the system's being as intuitive as it is, it's not difficult. But my rollout and Carl's rollout were very, very, very similar. It was short bursts, double check some things. Before we knew it, we were on for 24 hours before our official go live date. But yeah, it's been a simple process, and I agree that in-person training is important, and the short time frame between training and going hands-on with the system is just as important.
Yeah, the note of like keeping training close to the actual go live. That's one of the things that I see with CAD implementations I always find is interesting. Sometimes you'll do a training 3, 4, 5, 6 months before go live. And it's like, how do you expect people to retain this information and then be able to pull it out of their heads when they need it most is kind of beyond me. I always think like one of the things that we've started doing a little bit more of is like actually diving deeper into like we do the training and then immediately we're actually testing the platform. So they're getting hands-on reps right after the training. And sometimes that can be hard, like especially if it's night shift, right? And you've got 6 or 7 call takers, you might not get that many calls. Carl, you unmuted, so I'll let you dive into that.
I was just going to add to that one of the helpful things that we had is that as we were doing setup, we had a test phone number, so a 10-digit number that was connected to our version of Ava within the system that was accessible not to the public, but to any of us that had the phone number. I pushed that number out to my staff and told them, call it over and over and over, try to screw with it, try to make it say dumb things or give you stupid answers, like whatever it is you think you can do, just play with it. And that was super helpful because people had an idea, oh, that's what it sounds like when I'm talking to them. That's how it answers questions. That's how it provides information, and then could actually see on the screen the call for service that it created, or the window that comes up in our situation, and see what Ava captured, how it captured it, look at it for accuracy. That was really helpful before we ever even started doing like live testing, as we did a bunch of testing, like beta testing up front. That made people a lot more comfortable with it right out of the gate.
One of my favorite things about that was I was the dispatch number. So if something was an emergency, I got a lot of those calls, which was always a pleasure. I got to talk to a lot of your staff. And then, one question that just came in, do agencies ever move slower than 8 weeks to go live? And the answer is certainly yes. And we'll kind of go over and have quite a quick review of this. Catherine's agency, Hamilton County 911, ended up taking a little bit closer to maybe 13 or 14 weeks. When we had Christmas, that kind of stalled us a little bit. But a lot of it was, like, I actually think with a system like this, we target fast. We target that 6 to 8 week range. But if it goes over, and like in many ways, it's like just more reps for us to be able to kind of practice more, do more training sessions. And in many cases, that's really what it was with us in Hamilton County, where I think we kicked off on October 7th, 2024, and then we didn't go live until January 23rd, 2025. And so a lot of that was like, really, well, part of it was Christmas, but part of it was we wanted to build more confidence for the staff. And part of the way you could build, the best way to do that is you have a system that you can turn off and then turn back on. It's really rare that you can have, with any sort of software implementation in the PSAP, that kind of turnkey ability to go off and on and build that confidence and test with people. Kind of a good segue there. Kathy, could you just talk a little bit about kind of how it's been and how that process was post go live?
Yeah, so like Max said, we spent extra time kind of training and getting people more hands-on experience with the system. And then I think we turned it on and then turned it back off once, Max. Is that right? And then after that, it's been live ever since. So.
Yeah. And I guess for some context here, Hamilton County is, like, you guys have 13 different now law enforcement agencies, or is it 12? I know you just added one more.
Yes, audited.
Consolidated dispatch center that covers the entirety of Hamilton County, Tennessee, including Chattanooga. So it's a large population with a high number of user agencies, and I would say like a relatively complex implementation. And so like a lot of I think that was part of the process, and part of the reason why it went a little bit over was I think there ends up being slightly more complexity the larger the agency is. And then Corey, can you talk a little bit about La Crosse and kind of how things have been? I know you mentioned some of this already.
Oh, it's been great. Yeah, we're just over 41,000 calls as of this morning. We've got 7 law enforcement agencies that we dispatch for. Public feedback has been generally positive. We've made some adjustments to that, so we're getting actual feedback on the call and not the response now, which is really much more helpful. But yeah, no issues.
Carl?
Yeah, I mean, we did a pretty short window of testing. It was less than 2 weeks. It was actually, I think, close to a week of testing. We went live and we've never shut it off since. And since then, we've had a couple of special cases that occurred that were super helpful, and it just kind of proved its worth. All the way up to my city manager recognizing this product and saying, "Wow, this was really helpful in our water safety issue that we had with that tanker spill was significant." And we were getting a lot of calls, and we could fairly quickly, within a half an hour of making a phone call and having a back and forth conversation with Aurelian, we had it set up that one of the first questions it would ask on non-emergency calls was, is this reference the water issue? And if it was, it could send a text to a cell phone that had a link that was to our website that had all of the data about how often the water was being tested, everything that you could imagine that we were just having to repeat constantly until we implemented that. And then the 4th of July, and we're looking forward to, January 1, like for your go live, is the fireworks complaints. We cut our fireworks complaints by like 70% because they were just handled by the system. So we had a couple of like interesting use cases that occurred kind of on the fly. The 4th of July we had a little time, we had a week ahead of time, and so we worked on it for a while. The water outage was fast and moved fast. But again, just going back to that, not saying that Aurelian is the best thing since sliced bread, but I just have to say that the user experience and the ability to change things and to change use case on the fly, basically, I don't have any other system in our world here that operates that way. And so, yeah, it's been very successful. Like I said, 16,000 business calls that Aurelian's handled. And like you said, we're right at 65% since go live of calls that we don't have to intervene at all on. And it recognizes emergencies and tells us, transfers that call to us if it thinks it's an emergency. We've had a couple of finesses in that realm of what Ava was declaring was an emergency versus what we think is an emergency. But again, that's just changing some of the questioning and logic in the background. So very positive.
Yeah, I think in general, like an example from Hamilton was when people were doing burn reports, they kept on saying like some of the effect of I'm burning, and we would be like, this person's on fire. And we would transfer those emergently, and then we kind of realized that that's how people do burn reports in Chattanooga, and we're kind of able to kind of tweak that logic to make sure that the person wasn't actually on fire, but still get them on the right path. No, that makes sense. Kind of tying this all back, and I know we have a few kind of questions that I want to get to as well. When you think about this kind of change management piece, what if you had one or two things, and I'll start with you, Catherine. Sorry to put you on the spot. One or two things that you would recommend people think about or spend a lot of their time and energy on when it comes to implementing new software. What piece do you think is the most important?
I think just the buy-in from your telecommunicators and employees is the biggest piece. I think if you get them on board and get them excited about it, then it kind of all comes into place.
Yeah. Corey, Carl, any thoughts?
Open, honest communication early. And then, like Carl's said a couple of times, managing those expectations. It's building the excitement, but keeping it managed.
right? And I think a couple of us have mentioned, I know Max, you talked about it too, is, you know, there's literally thousands of new widgets and toys and solutions to any number of things in the 911 center that are all like, ooh, there's the next bright sparkly thing. But I think going back to identifying what are you actually trying to solve? And that's kind of what I appreciate, that this solution is solving a problem that we could easily articulate. Business calls were taking up an inordinate amount of time out of my dispatchers, interfering with our core function. How do we fix that? And so we attempted a couple of fixes, right? The re-engineering of our phone trees, and in one case, creating a phone tree from nothing. And then to this solution, we had a serious issue that we all knew was an issue. My dispatchers knew it was a problem. I knew it was a problem. And this spoke directly to that problem. That made it way easier to sell than, ooh, Carl has this new idea, because I get those. And let's do this thing in our 911 center. This was a way easier sell because they all recognized the problem, and that this clearly addressed that problem, or at least had the hope to, right? So I think that's the most important part, is addressing the problem, and then how this new technology, whatever it is that you're looking at, is actually going to either fix or at least partially mitigate the problem that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I 100% agree on like actually focusing on the problem and communicating the problem and viewing this as a way to solve the problem, not viewing this as technology for the sake of technology.
Right. And one of our core problems is we didn't have staffing, and we're struggling to hire. And the whole hiring process, as I'm sure all of you are aware, takes months. And there's 70 layers, and there's backgrounds, and there's polys, and there's all kinds of stuff. We had been trying to solve that part of this problem for literally 4.5, 5 years, and we could not get around the hump on that. I looked at it as the second half of that problem is the complexity within the 911 center, right? If I can't hire more people immediately, the least I can do is reduce complexity for what my individual telecommunicators were facing. This tool helped solve that problem.
And then kind of going us through the questions, and I'll direct this one to you, Catherine. How does this work with CAD? Like, what is that actual CAD integration piece like for you all?
So if we have a call that pops up on our dashboard and it needs to go into CAD, we can just go to a button, resolve, and sync it to CAD, and it goes straight into our CAD system with the address and the call type.
Thank you. Yeah. So basically, they have a CAD integration with Central Square Enterprise. We're able to sync that call directly into CAD and create that call for service. And then Corey, I know you mentioned this a little bit, but I just saw a question come in for this. What's been the response like for the public? I know we just had a news article come out this morning from Wisconsin Public Radio.
Public reaction has been generally positive. We do have external feedback turned on where a caller can both rate their call on a scale of 1 to 5, and they can also leave text comments regarding their calling. Up until a couple weeks ago, most of the negative ratings were actually rating the response to the call for service, not the call itself. We worked with Alex and rewrote that script on how the question is asked, and I think we're getting much better feedback that is focused on the call. Prior to going live, we did reach out to a bunch of our news agencies in the area and did I would say a fairly robust public announcement on what we were doing, a press release, and nobody's called and asked us why. So I think we did okay with it.
I remember, Catherine, when we first did it, and my feelings of this have changed a little bit, but when we first went live, there was a little bit of a press release, and I remember on Facebook there was people saying like, I can't believe this is taking 911 calls. And then the thing that stuck out to me most was the actual telecommunicators on Facebook correcting them.
They did. The telecommunicators were very passionate about how the system worked and wanted to let the public know that it was just the non-emergency calls.
Yeah, they were like answering questions too, which was like the first time I'd ever seen that. I was like, this is really exciting, because I see the Facebook things and I'm like, I just look at it and maybe sigh. But no, and then kind of the last question before we wrap things up, somebody asked, how does this impact coordination with field responders? Do you guys notice any significant change in the actual relationship, or maybe the way that the field responders interact with non-emergency complaints?
Seen some interaction from the responders. We don't have the CAD integration yet, hopefully with the new CAD after next Tuesday. But the call takers are taken from the dashboard and putting it into the narrative, and it says information from Aurelian. And there were some questions at first. I don't think that was appropriately rolled from the top down from our response agencies. But I've had officers call in and ask, what is it actually doing? And I'd say, here's the non-emergency number, call it, make something up, we'll take care of the rest. And it's been positive from there.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've seen a lot of difference from our responding agencies. They do see the same note in the call that if we pull the narrative across, it says that it was created by Aurelian. But we educated my board, advisory board, all 17 agencies, educated them on what it was supposed to do, what it was capable of, what phone numbers it would be answering. So there wasn't a lot of surprise. I think, I haven't had any negative feedback from the field saying, hey, I took a call that your Aurelian handled and it was just a cluster, or it was nothing like what, right? We get those anyway on 911s. I don't know, you take a 911 and it is not what they're telling you half the time. And so I never had any kind of field complaints that that it's not what is kind of being expected. And then I was nervous about turning on the public feedback piece of it, but within a couple of months we turned that on, and in the time that we've had public feedback allowed so people can put their comments in and rate it on that Likert scale, it's about 2.5, 3 to 1, positive to negative. So most people are positive, some are negative. And like you said, Corey, a lot of them have nothing to do with the call handling. It has to do with the officer was really great because when he came out, he took my complaint. Well, that's what they do. Or, it was 2 hours before someone got here, so your system sucks. Well, that has nothing to do with AVA. It has to do with whether we had people available to respond. So, yeah. Anyway, we're happy to turn on that public feedback. And I personally have reached out on several of those public feedbacks where they're saying something that just seems a little odd. I'll call them and talk to them about the experience and say, so what about this created your need to put that feedback in there? And what can we do to make that better? I think that's just part of our public outreach. And I don't do it often, but I've done it a few times.
Yeah, I think that piece is important, where it's like you're making a big change that alters the community interacts with law enforcement. Really important part, right? And so making sure that they're kind of informed, keeping them in the loop, and hearing them if they have anything to say about it, right? Because some of that feedback might be really useful, and so that feedback might be ways that we can make the product better for them as well. But to kind of wrap it up, I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate you all here. We have somewhat of an exciting announcement. Our second product is releasing on the 16th of December in 2 weeks. Carl's seen an early look of it, and we're doing a webinar to kind of do an announcement of it. It's really our first foray into 911, specifically helping 911 call takers drive the best outcomes on 911 calls, not automating them. But yeah, quick plug for that. That'll be on the 16th of December, and we'd love for you to show up. Kind of, early Christmas present, some might say, or ruining your Christmas vacation if you're going to spend it watching a webinar. Either way, hope to see you all there and appreciate you all taking the time. And a huge thank you to Catherine, Carl, and Corey for joining me today. It's been a pleasure working with them. They've really been on the cutting edge of this, and they've done a phenomenal job leading their centers and really helping us make a better product. So I'm very lucky to have worked with all three of them, and excited for a very long time. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa, as well.
All right. Thank you, Max. We are going to wrap up now. Thank you again to our presenters, our sponsor, Aurelian, and everyone for joining us today. This concludes our webinar.